Good morning, and how are you today? Today, rosehip wine. Fantastic. Now is the season for rosehips. They are everywhere up here in Orkney. They grow really abundantly. So I'm going to be making a fantastic, sweet, delicious rosehip wine. So why don't you come picking rosehips with us? Good job. When you're out picking your rosehips, you want to try and aim at all the big red juicy ones before they start turning mushy or the birds or the bees start eating them. Up here in Orkney, a lot of our rosehips get wind blown very quickly and dried out by the wind. So they start going all shrivelly and hard being. But that's okay. It doesn't really matter if they're a bit on the shriveled side. It adds all good flavours and a different type of flavour. Leave the green ones on the bush for later on in the season. Come back and get those a few weeks down the line and make a different type of rosehip wine, or maybe even a rosehip sherry. Fantastic stuff. With your 1.5 kilos of rosehips fresh off the bush, it's time to prepare them. It's simple, but it does take a bit of time to work your way through your 1.5 kilos of rosehips. And this process is just the same if you want to make a rosehip wine or a rosehip sherry. So the initial recipe is just the same. So I will be making the rosehip sherry using this base. So if you want to check out the rosehip sherry recipe, I will link it up above as and when it is ready to be out there, because sherry takes a wee bit longer than rosehip wine. Anyway, to prepare your rosehips, you want to simply remove the stalk and crush the rosehip in half, and then put that rosehip into a food bag. A lot of people often ask if you should leave the seeds of the rosehips in when you make a wine, or should you remove every single seed. Now my view is keep things simple. Add the seeds as well. They won't do any harm, they won't make your wine bitter at all. They don't contain any elements that you don't want in a wine. You want to place in the freezer to break down the cell structure, which releases a lot more juice and flavour and sugar into your wine, which is fantastic. It's not essential. If you've had a hard frost as well, that does the same thing as freezing the fruit. With 1.5 kilos of rosehips all crushed up and the stemmy bits removed, you want to just plop them in the freezer overnight, and I'll be with you first thing in the morning to continue with the rosehip wine recipe. Back in a minute now. Good morning, and how are you? Well, I've just removed my rosehips from the freezer, my full-on 1.5 kilos of lovely red rosehips. So the next thing I need to do is start making this delicious wine. I want to make a sweeter, rosé, delicious, fruity wine. So with 1.5 kilos of rosehips, I'm going to be adding 1.2 kilos of sugar. If you want to make a sweeter wine, like a dessert wine, add about 1.5 kilos. Or if you like your wine to be on the drier side, add about 1 kilo. You want to aim to make the wine to your tastes. Recipes are only guidelines. The author of recipes and myself making this video does not know how you like your wine or how you want it to turn out. So you can judge how sweet you want the finished product to be. Don't take guidelines in recipes as gospel. They are only that, guidelines. I will have a rant in another video about recipes, so stay tuned for that one. Anyway, rosehips. Simple. You want to pour your crushed and frozen rosehips into a fermentation bucket. Nice, simple. Once you've sterilised it, lid off and pour them in. They are looking perfect. Please ignore the storm outside. It's a blustery, wet, windy day up here in Orkney. And I was meant to go camping, but we cancelled because of the storm. Oh well. Right then. Next, on top of your rosehips in your bucket, you want to pour over 1.2 kilos of sugar. So get that poured in, and then the next step we're going to go through is adding the water. You want to pour over just enough water to dissolve all that sugar and get those rosehips on the way of being defrosted. So I'm using my camping stove to heat up about 2 litres of water. And we'll just wait for that to come to a boil. Start bubbling, start being awesome. In a lot of my recipes, I tend to add a cup of tea to add the tannin. However, in this recipe, I'm not doing that because the seeds of the rosehips add an awful lot of tannin to the wine. The seeds are abundant and bountiful of tannin. It's one of those natural sources. That is the reason I'm not adding any tannin to the wine. Some people at this point would add peptidase, and my thinking is I don't tend to do that because I don't really see the point. This method of extracting the flavour from the rosehips will bring out an awful lot of colour and flavour, and in my view, adding peptidase won't add anything to the finished wine. Well, hey, my water now has come to a boil, so I'm going to turn off the gas and pour over the liquid. Good stuff. And give that a really good shake. You want to get all that sugar working in, getting it all dissolved and perfect. Oh, delicious. And then simply top up to your 1 gallon mark with the rest of your water. Now this wine, with the 1.2 kilos of sugar added, will give you a wine of about 14 to 16% if you use a yeast that can go up that high. And then the residual sugar will be turned into that sweetness. Because I want my wine to be sweet, I'm not going to be using a high strength yeast. What I'm using is a Cross My Loaf mead yeast, because I think the combination of the mead yeast and the rosehips will become a delicious, delightful, fantastic, amazing, brilliant wine. But you choose the yeast that you prefer, whether that's a general purpose yeast or something more specific. Play around with yeast varieties. There are so many in the market and they all do slightly different things and give you different results. Find a yeast that you like. Find the yeast that will complement the wine that you are making. With those rosehips being frozen, they're going to bring the temperature of that boiling water right the way down. So you can add your yeast straight away. I love recipes like this where you don't need to wait too long to do the next stage. So sprinkle, sprinkle, sprinkle. And then whack on your lid with an airlock in which has been filled up. Fantastic. And set it aside in a warm place for 3 days. And then I'll be right back here with you and we will proceed and get this wine finished off in the demijohn, fermenting really well, being awesome. So I'll see you all soon now. Good morning, and how are you today? Welcome back. My rosehip wine has been in the fermentation bucket for 3 days. It has been bubbling away, looking brilliant and beautiful. I've kept on a heat mat because the temperature has been dropping a bit recently. It's been a bit chillier, so turned the heat mats on. What we need to do is remove all of those lovely rosehips through a sieve, through a colander, and get that liquid into a demijohn. Very simple to do. You just want to pour your liquid through a sieve or through a colander. Get all those bits of rosehip out. Brilliant stuff. The aroma is beautiful coming off these rosehips. And these are so good. I think there's a bit more life left in these rosehips. So I'm going to make another wine out of these. And that will be in a different video, another video. So join me for that video up by here. And we'll see what we can make from these rosehips. Fantastic. So now shove these back into the buckets. And you want to grab your clean, sanitised, sterilised demijohn and siphon or pour, if you have a big enough funnel, all that beautiful orangey reddish liquid into the demijohn. I'm using my old faithful siphon. I can't really get on with the auto siphon. It's far too vigorous, far too fast, far too effective and powerful. The flow of the liquid is very difficult to control, I find. So I prefer my thinner suck it and see siphon. Gives you a chance to have a wee taste as well. So in goes the siphon and siphon it away. That's good. The colour on that is looking divine and brilliant. And now we just need to top up the demijohn. Just to the neck, I underestimated the amount of absorption of the liquid of the water into the rosehips. And then simply insert a filled airlock into the neck. So you want to set your demijohn with your rosehip wine aside. Rack it as and when required and let it carry on fermenting and then start clearing. Once it's clear, hide it away, forget about it, and then bottle and enjoy. You will not be disappointed in rosehip wine. Rosehip sherry is another delicious wine you can make, and I am making a video. It'll be up by here, and I am making that video as we speak, so that video will be up by here. And if you want to see what I'm doing with my leftover rosehips, check out this video by here. Rosehip wine, well worth making. If you can get your hands on some rosehips, make it. And I'll see you all soon for the next video. You have fun now.